So this incident happened during the time of last Christmas. I had found a cool ornament in a clearance box. It had a built-in camera to record a unique perspective on your holiday celebrations. I grabbed the last one from the store's dusty shelf and brought it home for less than $10. I told my daughters about the camera and said we would secretly catch Santa in the act. I had an old costume in the attic and intended to deliver some gifts in full view of the camera on the Christmas night. My girls were overjoyed and went back and forth trying to find the best place to put the ornament on the tree. They had no idea I repositioned it later so it could catch the living room in a good angle. In the nights leading up to Christmas, I turned the camera on to make sure everything was working properly. In the morning, I previewed the footage just long enough to confirm the thing was working. I inserted the SD card back into the ornament and slipped in a new battery in anticipation of the big night. I didn't want to disappoint my girls with a failed recording. We enjoyed Christmas Eve as a family, playing board games and eating way more junk food than there was room in our stomachs like we do every year. We let our daughters open one gift from Mom and Dad before going to bed. My wife also headed to bed while I turned off all the lights. I wore my Santa costume and went to the living room to act as a Santa. I did everything you would expect Santa to do. I ate most of the cookies, I drank the milk, and I dropped a few presents by the fireplace, all in full view of the camera. On Christmas morning, the girls came running into our bedroom to wake us up. They excitedly insisted we watch the video before opening the presents. I transferred the footage to my laptop, forwarded it to where Santa showed up and pressed play. My girls squealed with delight and jumped in front of the screen. It brought me so much joy to see how happy the girls were. I was too lazy to stop the video, so it continued to play in the background while we unwrapped our gifts. While opening the presents, I spotted a box I had not seen the night before. It was small and wrapped in a blue foil paper I did not recognize. My name was on it, but my wife seemed as surprised as I was to see it there. Noticing my confusion, my youngest daughter said it must be from Mrs. Elf. I was ready to dismiss her elf comment as just another weird thing kids say. My daughter pointed to the laptop. By then, the video had ended and all that was left on the screen was a preview of the first frame. Panic struck me. I know my wife didn't dress up as an elf. I scanned the video, clicking forward and back until I saw what my daughter had seen. Someone was in the living room. He walked into the corner after I had turned the lights off. He stood there watching me parading around as Santa. The video went completely quiet after that. It was as though the camera failed to record a single sound. The strange, tall man in an elf costume stood perfectly still for over an hour, watching the camera from a distance. After a while, he walked over to the plate of cookies and bit the head of a gingerbread man. I glanced at the plate and saw his teeth mark on the decapitated cookie. The man then quietly approached the Christmas tree. I thought the audio wasn't working, but as he reached the tree, I began hearing his slow and steady breaths. He reached towards the ornament, and the video stopped. I panically grabbed the blue box he'd left behind. I frantically removed the wrapping paper, opened the box, and looked inside. There, on a bed of bubble wrap, was the battery I had put in the camera the night before. My wife took the ornament and opened the back of camera. The battery was missing. I don't know what scares me more, what the camera caught, or what the elf might have done after he turned off the camera. I searched every corner of the house, but I didn't find anything or anyone. I called the police and showed them the footage, but it was useless. They didn't find anything about who that was. It has been a year since that incident, but still, that incident scares me off. Next Christmas is in few days, but I am not happy as I used to be during this time of year. So until last Christmas, I used to play the role of a Santa Claus in a local mall for past 20 years. Christmas is my favorite holiday and I always had the Santa Claus built in me. I was a somewhat overweight gentleman who was able to grow a long beard during the winter season. All I had to do was dye my beard white, wear a red suit, and I'd be a perfect Santa. I worked on the voice to the best of my ability to ensure I didn't sound like a guy in my 20s. I had the voice, the suit, the beard, the look, and everything else I needed to get ready for the Christmas rush. Outside of the red suit, I am just an electrician who makes a decent wage. In my 20 years of experience of being a Santa, I learned the most valuable lesson of all: never promise anything. There will be kids that ask for a lot for Christmas, things that most parents couldn't even dream of affording. I was taught from day one that you always say Santa will see what he can do. Making promises was the last thing you wanted to do. Some parents could barely afford their children decent clothes. I've held back tears numerous times whenever a kid would ask for something as simple as a new toothbrush. The great thing about this mall was that there was no fee to sit on my lap. The only fee came if you wanted a picture to take home, which was an even $5. This past Christmas was the toughest because it was my last year portraying Santa Claus. All of the mall employees used to hug me every day when I came to work outside of the costume. By this time, I was pushing 50 and still working as an electrician, but I always thought that portraying Santa Claus was my best job ever. All good things must come to an end, they say, and thus did my run as the iconic Santa. The day after Thanksgiving, known as Black Friday, was my last day wearing Santa costume. There were tears mostly from me, but I knew whoever was taking my place was going to do great. The kids were great as usual. Sure, some kids were a bit spoiled. They asked for ridiculous things like drones, the newest iPhones, and iPads. Friday, December 23rd was my last shift, the night before Christmas Eve. The mall was packed with last-minute shoppers and family, with the kids coming to see me. This last day was easily the toughest one to date, as I knew after that day, I'd be moving on from playing Santa Claus. What set me apart from other mall Santas was the fact that I never took a break. I would be there from 10 in the morning until 7 in the evening, but I never once took a lunch. That day went by faster than I could ever explain, and at 7 o'clock, it was time to wrap it up. I was beginning to leave when I noticed a little girl slowly approaching me. I greeted her and asked where her parents were. She didn't speak. She kept walking toward me and held her arms out, as if she wanted to pick me up. I looked around for her parents, but I didn't see anyone that was looking for her. I picked the little girl up and sat her on my lap. I asked her name and she told me her name was Lisa Wheeler. I took this information to relay a radio message to have the name Lisa Wheeler broadcast over the mall speaker system. That way her parents would come and find her. While this was happening, I kept her company. I asked her what she wanted for Christmas, but she didn't answer. She looked off into the distance as if she were in a trance. She then looked up at me with the cutest set of blue eyes and said she wanted a friend. I was a bit taken aback by that answer. In my 20 years of being Santa, I've never had any kids say they wanted a friend for Christmas. I patted her on her head and said, "I will always be your friend." She smiled, hugged me, and hopped down off my lap. I tried to make her stay until security came, but she ran off. I weighed about 300 pounds at that time with a red suit, and no matter how fast I ran, I couldn't catch up to her. I saw Lisa turn a corner into a department store, and when I did the same, there was no sign of her. I started asking around if anyone had seen a little girl, but no one saw her. Security came and asked where she went. I told them that she ran off into the department store, and they started to become worried. I was getting more and more worried as time went on, but after a thorough search of the mall, there were no signs of Lisa Wheeler. It was around 1 in the morning when they finally told me I should go home and get some sleep, but I couldn't sleep knowing I left a defenseless little girl alone. I lay in my bed all night, staring at the ceiling. I kept thinking about how I let that little girl down. I should have been able to catch up with her and keep her safe. The next morning, I woke up, made some breakfast, and got on the computer to do a little research. I thought if I could find the parents, I could let them know where she was last seen if she hadn't been found yet. I googled the name Lisa Wheeler Parkersburg on Google. I clicked the first article and it sent chills down my spine. There was the photo of the exact girl that I had seen yesterday, and it was a missing report of her. There it was written that she had gone missing on February 6th. Nothing made sense. I had just seen her the previous night on the 23rd of December. But the more I researched, the more uneasy I became. After reading the next article, I couldn't hold my tears. Turned out police had found her dead body on February 16th in a frozen ravine a mile outside of her home. Lisa Wheeler was dead months ago. She died nearly a year before I met her. All she wanted was a friend. It's been a year since that incident, but still I remember about her every night. "3 years before I was born, my mother and father had their first child. He lived for a mere 7 minutes before his breathing stopped and he died. I have never inquired as to what caused him to stop breathing. A little over a year after this terrible incident, my parents had a daughter, and then 2 years after her, I was born. Naturally, my parents had no reason to tell me about my older brother when I was younger, and even as we all got older, the story was never told to me, presumably because it was too painful to recall. If the following events had never occurred, I might have never found out about him at all. In early December during my junior year of high school, the family gathered around the Christmas tree to load it up with the ornaments we had gathered over the years. Our family continued to grow after my birth. My parents had added another son and daughter. My parents had bought each of us an ornament each year. We always had a tough time fitting all of the ornaments onto the tree. This year was no different. In addition to the ornaments, we had a fairly nice manger set that was placed underneath the tree. If you don't know what a manger set is, it is a collection of figurines that depict the scene of the birth of Jesus Christ, and it is used during Christmas seasons for decorations. It had the whole birth party, and of course, contained a wooden crib in which the figurine of baby Jesus lay. After my siblings and I had set this up, we stood for a minute or two and admired our work, and then we each went to our rooms. A day after setting the tree up, I walked into the living room to find one of my ornaments on the ground. It was the first ornament that had been given to me and had written "Firstborn Son" into its face. The bright bronze had become cloudy over the years, but the ornament was sentimental, so it always managed to find a prominent place on the tree. I found the spot I thought it had fallen from and rehung it before walking through the room. I passed through the room the next day to find the ornament again on the ground, and again I hung it up. I tried to hang it in a different spot this time, assuming the weight had allowed it to slide from a thin branch, but to no avail, as it was on the ground the following day as well. I placed it back on the tree and was not too surprised when I came in the next day to find the ornament missing from the spot. What did surprise me was that the ornament was not on the ground, but was instead sitting on the coffee table a few feet away. I assumed my mother was having the same problem with the ornament and had just given up and placed it on the table, so I stopped in the kitchen to ask her about it. She was doing the dishes, and when I asked, she told me that she also had been picking the ornament up each time she walked into the room. For the next few days, each time I walked into the room, I continued to find the ornament off of the tree. But now the location had changed. It was no longer lying in random spots on the floor or on the table like it had been before. Each time I walked into the room now, the ornament was inside of the roofed manger, leaning against the crib with the Jesus figure. I was young, and I'm sure that didn't help prevent me from thinking that things were adding up a little strangely. It seems stupid now, but I grew up in a semi-religious family, and something about finding my firstborn son written ornament leaning against Jesus every day appeared to me to be of something evil. So at that time, my father used to spend a lot of time in basement doing some work. On the night of December 23rd, he was as usual working downstairs again. Around 2 a.m., he was awakened by footsteps crossing down the first-floor hallway above his head. He decided he would come up and see who was up, and then continue upstairs to bed. As he came up the basement stairs, he could hear a person walking through the kitchen on the other side of the door, but when he opened it, the person had just crossed into the dining room. He followed the steps through the kitchen and around the bend, but again was too late. The footsteps had beat him around the turn and into the living room. He rounded the corner and was surprised to see no one there. As he stood there, scanning the space and trying to figure out what he had heard, he noticed an object lying on the ground in the middle of the room. As he walked up to it and started bending over, he realized 2 objects were lying in the middle of the living room floor. Baby Jesus and the firstborn son written ornament that was lying against his side. The next day, my dad told all of us the story at breakfast. My parents must have known that I was feeling a little unsettled from it all, so they decided to finally tell me what they had kept a secret for 16 years. They told me about their happiness at getting pregnant, the 9 long and exciting months my mom had carried my brother, and their feeling of complete desolation and absolute loss when he died. They told me how it still hurt, especially around the holidays. At first, I assumed this was because everyone becomes sentimental around the holidays. Then they told me the real reason: my brother had been born and died on December 23rd at 2 a.m. Last night had been the 20th anniversary of his death.